You want to know the best glue for makers? Stick around.
To the puppet nerds of the world, this may sound absurd, but this is the place you need to be. We'll do an interview and then we'll stitch and glue all of the dolls, we'll make it shake. If you want to be in the know and to play like a pro, subscribe to Krutinger Puppets.
Adam Krutinger here, and welcome back. Today I have a great little maker tip for you. Over the years of all the projects that we've done here on this channel, there's one common question that I get, and that has to do with the glue that I use. If you've been watching this channel for a long time, you'll notice 90% of the time I use contact cement. We'll talk about some of the different brands in just a moment, but first let me tell you why this is one of the best glues to use for a professional puppet building and for kind of making things in general. There's two main reasons why I like it a lot. The first reason is it's extremely strong. Often these seams are stronger than the foam itself. And it makes sense too. These types of professional contact cements are meant for making shoes. And shoes go through a lot of wear and tear. And not even just wear and tear in general, but also moisture. Moisture from sweat and even from the elements from the weather. Those types of things just give me more confidence on the strength of my seams when puppet building. The other thing that's great about contact cement is most of the contact cements, once you glue it together, the seams are still flexible. Unlike some other glues like hot glue, it can be a little bit stiff. In some cases, it's not a big deal, but it's nice to have that flexibility. But there's one problem that I notice a lot of new builders have with contact cement, and that's that they're doing it wrong. They try to use it like a regular glue. They slap some glue on two pieces and stick it together, and it does not hold. Contact cement is different. You have to put it on both sides of what you're going to be gluing, let it dry completely, and then attach it together while it's dry. If you do it that way, you will get a bond so strong that it will not be able to come off. Let me show you right now. Now make sure to stay tuned till the end, because I'm also going to show you a couple different techniques for applying the glue to the foam. At the end, I'm also going to talk about the different brands of contact cement that I like too. But for now, I'm going to use my favorite called Master. And be sure to stick around to the end so you can hear a funny little story about why I don't like to use hot glue in my puppets anymore. Now for all these glues, you have to make sure you're doing this in a well-ventilated area. So it's best to do this outside and using a respirator, or inside you must have great ventilation that goes to outside because these fumes are toxic. So I'm just going to open up the can, and most of the cans have a little brush inside. So for right now, I'm going to use that as my applicator. And I'm just going to brush on a very thin layer. You want the thinnest layer you possibly can get. That'll also help it dry really fast. Just carefully putting it on to create this seam. Now with such a thin layer, it'll only take probably like 2 minutes or so to dry. Now that drying time could be a little bit different depending on the humidity and where you are in the world, but you'll be able to tell that it's done drying because if you move it around at a different angle, you might not be able to see it on camera. While it's wet, it kind of glistens a little bit, and when it's dry, it's a little bit more dull. But if you want to speed up that drying time, you can use a hair dryer, or if you're careful, you can also use a heat gun. Heat guns get extra hot though, so you want to make sure you don't hold it too close to the foam and not for too long. Now I can see that these two edges are completely dry. Now here's the thing with contact cement, like I was saying, once you put these together, that's where it attaches. Unlike Elmer's glue or other PVA glues, when you put it on something, you can kind of put it together, then mush it around a little bit to get to the right spot. With the contact cement, the second it touches, it's a permanent bond. So you really want to make sure you line it up perfectly. So I'm just going to line, this is just scrap foam, so it's not, doesn't make a big deal. But you want to be very careful that you're putting these edges together very carefully and evenly. Just like that, and I like just to give it a little push so we get a good bond. And like I said, that's a really strong connection, stronger than the foam probably is. And again, like I said before, the seam is completely flexible, which is really handy when working with foam. Now for that seam, I put that together using the brush inside the can, but I'm going to show you another technique using a little applicator. So now I have two new pieces of foam I'm going to glue together, and for the applicator, I'm going to use this little piece of paper to put my glue on, and the actual applicator itself is just a scrap of foam. I just cut a little corner off one of the scraps of foam, and I'm going to use that almost like a little makeup sponge to dab the glue onto the seam. So with this, I'm going to take a little dollop of this glue, put it right on here like that. Then I'm going to use my applicator here and dip it into the glue That way I can very carefully stipple it on, kind of smear it on a nice, even, light coat. Because that's one of the nice things about this contact cement is you really don't need a lot. Unlike some other glues, the less you use, the stronger the bond is, as long as you're getting good coverage. So again, I'm just going to let this dry quickly. And I'll put it together just like I did before. And there we go. I have another good, strong bond. Now, there's not too much difference between those two techniques. It's mostly just personal preference to which one you want to use. Personally, I like to use the brush in the can. For me, it's a lot more convenient. And the one thing I don't like about using this technique is when I do it with the brush in the can, each time I'm done using the glue, the cap is on the lid, so it's not letting more fumes out. Whereas when I put a dollop on a piece of paper or something like that, the fumes are coming off of this and going into the room continuously. Luckily, that's not too much of a problem for me now because of the ventilation that I have, but I think the less fumes that are going into the space, the better. So again, that's why I generally don't use this technique. But sometimes I do use it. And the times that I do use it is sometimes when this brush gets to the end of its life, which this can is starting to get a little old. You can probably tell from the video, it's a little bit stringier than it typically is when it's a brand new can. That can make the brush get a little bit gummy. If the brush is too gummed up and has too much dried glue on it, then that's a time I'll use the applicator. Another good time to use the applicator is when you're gluing humongous pieces. This is a small brush, which is great for making small puppets, but sometimes I have to make really big puppets, like the Audrey 2 puppets that I made a couple years ago. For that, I was building outside, so I poured some of the glue into a little bowl, and then I dipped a larger piece of foam that I almost used like a big squeegee to glue those big seams. So it's handy to know both techniques. Now let me show you the 3 most common brands of contact cement that I see makers using. The first, you guessed it, is my personal favorite, Master. Now, I'll tell you selfishly that the reason why this is my favorite is because it's the highest quality glue that I can get locally. I can stop by my local leather shop and get this glue, but you can also get it on Amazon, and I'll be sure to leave a link down in the description. Again, it's a really strong glue that professional shoemakers use. However, I do have to say this is not quite the industry standard. The industry standard that most makers use is Barge glue. Barge does come in the same kind of can as this. I coincidentally just have this humongous can from that Audrey 2 build I was telling you about. It's very similar to the Masters. To me, it's a little bit thicker and a little bit more stringy even when you first get it. The Masters, when you first get it, has a slightly lower viscosity, which I just kind of like. But again, 90% of makers use this, and it is great. All the professional shops use it. However, there is another contact cement that you can get at almost any hardware store, and that is the Weldwood glue. This also comes in a larger can, but again, I happen to have the smallest version right here. This works very similar to the other glues. I find that it dries, at least in my area, a lot faster than the other ones, which is sometimes a disadvantage for larger projects, but as long as you know that it does that, you can use it to your advantage. The last thing that I'll say about this is I find that the seams after it's dry are a little bit less flexible. For 99% of the time, I'm sure it wouldn't make much of a difference for the use, but it's a good thing just to know that if you know you need a seam to be very flexible, I might use one of the other glues. So all 3 of these are great glues. They all have their better uses, and I use kind of whatever I have available. But again, my personal favorite is the Master. Now, I'd also love to know what you think. If you use these glues or maybe even something different, let me know down in the comments below. But before we go, I just want to say one more thing, because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about it. I get the question all the time, and the question is, can I just use hot glue instead? And the answer is yes. At the end of the day, you can really use any glue that works for you. To me personally, hot glue is not a professional material. Hot glue is not made for a permanent bond. It's almost like the duct tape of glue. It's good for everything, but great for nothing. The hot glue adds a lot of physical weight because of the glue sticks and the thickness of it. It's not as flexible, and it's not too resilient to heat and weather, which may sound like not a big problem for puppets, but I'll tell you, when I first started building my puppets, I used hot glue to put them together. And one day I went to do a performance for kids at a school, and the show went great. And then after the show, I put my puppets back in the car, and I accidentally left my puppets in the car overnight. Now, the weather in Buffalo is all over the place. In the winter, it's extremely cold, but in the summer, it does get very, very hot. And in this case, it was the summer, and when I went back to my car the next morning, I noticed that the hot glue had softened up, and actually one of the eyes that I glued on my puppet kind of slid down the face and was in the wrong spot. It was quite terrifying, but it was also kind of heartbreaking because it ruined the puppet. You might just think, why don't you just move the eye back where it was? But the problem was it left a glue snail trail from where it started, and that completely wrecked the fabric that I made the puppet out of. Looking back, I wish I took the puppet apart just to look at what it did to the insides, but I'm sure that some of the seams and the foam also started to come apart. Though it wasn't that noticeable because of the fleece covering, but it's still something to think about. Hot glue is perfect if you're just a beginner puppeteer or if you're a craft puppet builder, but if you're building professional level puppets, especially for clients, you need to use higher quality materials, and one of these would be a great option. And again, I have links to all of these glue down in the description, and if you use those links, it does support the channel. If you want to learn more about puppetry news and commentary in general and other puppet building plans, make sure to check out puppetnerd.com. There we have weekly updates with all types of different tutorials and projects and fun puppetry news. Well, that's it for now. See you next time.